So how do we reconcile the morality of property, or is property? And remember, property here, we're not talking just about real property. We're not talking about real estate. We are, but we're talking about all property, which is money. Ideas, patents, cars, vehicles, everything that we might consider as property, right? And so, the criticism of property is that it creates a lot of inequality. Okay, we're not a communal, at least in our country, and throughout most of the world, we're not totally communal, where everybody owns everything and everybody shares, right? There's certain property rights every place, and we have pockets then of wealth and poverty as a result of that, and yet when we have property, there's less waste, and it also provides lots of incentive, and that's what helps create wealth, and it's just, it's fair. Most people would say, right? The distribution, not always, but the opportunity to obtain it, right, should be just and fair. Not always, it's not always, but it should be. Property is a system, right? Underlying values are moral ones, okay, with property. And here again, it's great to have property, but do you use it properly? Property and properly, yeah. I would argue that Bill Gates having property and all his stock and whatnot in Microsoft has been a wonderful thing. It's created lots of jobs, and it's created lots of different ways for us to do things, just like the PowerPoint you might be watching now. Okay, and it's simplified things. It's made us more efficient, more effective, et cetera, right? But he's extremely wealthy as a result of it, and so I would say, yeah, it is moral, right? And property does provide ordering of relationships between people. People for the ethical treatment of mosquitoes. It's funny, I just glanced at an article before I got here, and it said now the Zika virus that causes brain damage in kids, but they just done a few preliminary experiments, and it might become an effective treatment for brain cancers. Strange. So business decision, Vioxx or Celebrex. So years ago, again before your time, but Vioxx was a drug that hit the market. It was good for people that had arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, knees hurt, shoulders, whatever. They could take Vioxx, and it relieved a lot of the pain. Unfortunately, they found out that people were dying, some of them, not all of them by any means, but some of them were dying prematurely and unexpectedly from some heart problems. I actually had an aunt who was one of those who was on Vioxx. And so ultimately Vioxx in particular was the one that was most at fault, or most pointed to. Ultimately, it was pulled, but people actually went before Congress and says, you don't understand, we live in such pain day to day. Please let us take the drug. We understand the risks, and we're willing to accept the risks. So it was interesting, but Vioxx was pulled. I believe Celebrex is still available, but far more limited, I think, in its use. So business decision. Okay, and again, here's an ethical thing. So this James Damore, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If you guys followed the news here just recently in the last few months, he wrote a blog or something. I can't remember. It was an internal memo maybe to Google. He worked for Google. He was an engineer, and he said, he was kind of tired of hearing maybe a little bit about all the diverse problems that they were having between men and women, because Google had like most tech companies do. They have far more men working for them than they do women. And he was saying, well, wait a minute, it's not necessarily because we discriminate or we're not diverse. He says there may be biological reasons for this, that men are just wired a little differently than women. And that created a firestorm, and people were just completely upset. And how dare he say something like that it just can't be, and he was fired. Okay, well, one, was it ethical for him to say that? I don't know, we could have some good discussions about that. But two, then, was it ethical for Google to fire him? Was it legal? And he's suing, so we'll maybe find out if it's legal or not for them to have fired him for expressing an opinion. And here's the whole ethical dilemma. So Google admires and says they encourage diversity and diversity of thought, and that's exactly what he was doing. He was expressing a diverse and different thought. It certainly wasn't one they agreed with. Okay, and yet he was fired for expressing that thought. So it's really an interesting thing. So can an act be ethical but not legal? And again, I've told you my opinion on that. I think opinions may vary. Can an act be legal but not ethical? Well, yeah, I would say that's probably true as well. That there are things that we can do legally that may not be, ethical. So. Yeah, I'm not thinking of something right off the top of my head. Is it ethical to put animals at risk to test drug safety? When I've asked, classes, face-to-face classes, I'll say, well, most of them would probably agree that, if we're talking about medical advances to really help maybe cure cancer or heart disease or something like that, most of them say that's fine. But if it comes to things like makeup and things like that, maybe to test them on animals is probably unethical. So there you go. There's the end of chapter 2. Good luck with the test that's coming up.